When the USDA truck pulled up my driveway, I knew something was wrong. The man who stepped out didn't look like any inspector I'd ever dealt with. Slick hair, expensive boots, clipboard tucked under his arm like a weapon. His name was Rick Harlow, and from the moment he smirked at my chicken barns, I could tell he wasn't here to help. "Morning," he said, voice sharp enough to slice through the crisp Tennessee air. "Got a few reports about possible sanitation violations." Reports? My stomach dropped. My farm, Maple Hollow Poultry, had never failed an inspection. Ever. I'd built it from the ground up after my father's heart attack, turning his small egg operation into a fully licensed USDA-certified poultry farm. Every surface gleamed. Every bird was tagged, tracked, and vaccinated. So when Rick said reports, I knew it wasn't about chickens. It was personal. Still, I smiled. "Of course, sir. You're welcome to inspect any building you like. We've got the biosecurity logs ready for you." He gave a fake chuckle. "Oh, I'm sure you do." He didn't take off his boots before entering the processing barn, a huge red flag. The man walked right past the disinfectant mats like he owned the place. My farm hands exchanged looks, but I motioned for them to stay quiet. USDA inspectors could be touchy, and I didn't want to make it worse. Rick began scribbling on his clipboard before he'd even looked at anything. "Tell me, Mr. Carver, how often do you clean these drains?" "Daily," I replied. "We keep records." He crouched down, poked a spotless grate with his pen, and frowned like he'd just found a dead rat. I'll need to verify that." The man spent 3 hours trying to find something wrong. He measured water temperature at the sanitizing station, counted birds, checked feed silos. Every time I provided paperwork, he barely glanced at it before muttering something under his breath. Finally, he turned to me outside the barn. "You've got a problem," he said. "Really?" I asked, keeping my tone calm. "What kind of problem?" He held up a photo on his tablet, a close-up of a small patch of mud near the entrance. "Standing water. Could be contamination risk. Biohazard violation." I stared at him. "That's from the rain last night. It's not even near the birds." Rick smiled, slow, smug. "Poisonous. Still counts. I'm going to have to mark this as a potential health risk. Might lead to a temporary suspension of your certification until further review." Temporary suspension. Those words could kill a farm faster than disease. One mark on a USDA record and the buyers disappear. Insurance skyrockets, and neighbors start whispering. I clenched my jaw. "With respect, sir, you're overreaching." He leaned in close enough for me to smell his cologne. "With respect, sir, I'm the one with the clipboard." That's when I realized who I was dealing with. Not an inspector doing his job, but a man looking for leverage. Someone who thought power came with a badge and a pen. As he drove off, leaving tire tracks in my gravel drive, my foreman, Luis, walked up. "What was that about?" he asked. I sighed. "He's fishing." "For what?" "Trouble." That night I couldn't sleep. My wife, Mara, found me at the kitchen table, staring at the inspection forms. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, pouring coffee. "Worse," I muttered. "A bureaucrat with a grudge." She raised an eyebrow. "You think he's dirty?" I shrugged. "I've seen it before. Some inspectors take kickbacks, some push smaller farms out so big corporations can move in. But this guy, I don't know." He seemed too sure of himself. Mara rested a hand on mine. "You know what to do if he files something unfair." I did know. In fact, I knew it better than anyone. Because what Rick didn't realize was that I wasn't just a farmer. 2 days a week, I sat behind a different desk, a federal one, as a USDA administrative adjudicator. My job was to review disputes and appeals filed against USDA decisions. The very process Rick threatened me with was something I quietly oversaw. Of course, my role there was confidential. I couldn't disclose it to field inspectors or local offices to avoid conflicts of interest. But if Rick filed a fraudulent claim or falsified his report, well, let's just say it wouldn't end well for him once it reached my docket. Still, I hoped it wouldn't come to that. I wanted peace, not war. The next morning, Rick returned. No notice, no appointment. Just the same smug expression and that clipboard of doom. Follow-up inspection, he announced. I forced a smile. Already? You were just here yesterday. He shrugged. New reports came in. He pointed to my feed truck unloading grain by the silos. You buy from Hayden Feed Company, right? Yes. Interesting. They're under review for improper labeling. You'll need to provide your last 3 months of feed certifications. Immediately, Luis whispered, "This guy's out for blood." Rick overheard. "You can keep your opinions to yourself, sir. Or I can note insubordination." I wanted to tell him where to shove that clipboard, but I bit my tongue. Instead, I gathered the paperwork and let him take his photos, even though every flash of his camera made my blood boil. When he finally left, Mara came running out of the house. "He just posted something online," she said, showing me her phone. There it was, a public notice on a local farming Facebook group. USDA reviewing Maple Hollow poultry for possible contamination concerns. Buyers advised to hold purchases pending results. My name, my farm, tarnished with one click. That's when I knew this wasn't just about some mud or feed. Rick wanted me gone, and I had no idea why yet. But I'd find out soon enough. Because while Rick thought he could weaponize the USDA against me, he didn't know I was sitting on the very board that would decide his fate. And when that day came, he'd wish he'd kept his boots clean. 2 days after Rick's Facebook post, my phone started ringing off the hook. Buyers, distributors, even a few longtime restaurant clients. "Hey, Tom," one of them said, voice tight with apology. "We gotta pause orders until this review clears up. You know how it goes, liability and all." I didn't blame them, but it felt like a gut punch every time. By noon, I'd lost half my weekly sales. Mara tried to calm me. "It'll blow over," she said. "The truth always comes out." "Yeah," I muttered. But the truth doesn't pay feed bills. That evening, as I walked through the barns, the birds clucked softly under the amber lights. Thousands of them, each one depending on me to keep things running. The smell of feed, straw, and faint disinfectant was oddly comforting. This was my world, my father's legacy, and one man with a clipboard was trying to erase it. The next week, Rick came back. Again. This time with a younger inspector trailing behind him. A woman in a crisp jacket who looked nervous. "Routine verification," Rick said as he signed into the logbook. "Got to make sure last week's issues were addressed." I kept my expression neutral. "You mean the puddle that evaporated 2 days ago?" He ignored the jab. "We'll see." They started in the hatchery. The young inspector, Lena, took photos carefully, keeping her gloves clean and following every protocol. Rick, meanwhile, stomped around like a bull in a china shop. He accidentally knocked over a feed bucket, smeared his hand across a vent grate, then wrote something down. Luis whispered, "He's trying to make it look dirty." I nodded slightly, keeping my cool. After 2 hours, Rick stepped outside to take a phone call. I seized the moment. "Lena," I said quietly, "how long you been doing this?" She looked startled but relaxed when she saw my genuine expression. 6 months, she said. "Mostly under him. He's intense." I raised an eyebrow. "That's one word for it." She hesitated, glancing toward the door. "He said your place was suspiciously clean." I thought that was a weird way to put it. Suspiciously clean. The phrase stuck like a thorn. That wasn't something a by-the-book inspector said. It was something someone said when they'd already decided on the outcome. Before I could press further, Rick came back out. "Everything all right here?" "Yes, sir," Lena said quickly. Rick's eyes narrowed at me. "We're wrapping up. Expect a report soon." And with that, they left. 3 days later, an official letter arrived in the mail. Notice of suspension, USDA Establishment 4916, Maple Hollow Poultry. My hands shook as I opened it. The reasons were laughable. Biosecurity failure, uncontained water runoff, improper labeling of feed origin, unsanitary processing surfaces. It read like a checklist of lies. Luis slammed his cap on the table when I showed him. "He's framing you." "I know," I said, voice low. He's got someone feeding him bad intel or he's got a motive. Mara folded her arms. Then fight him. I can't, I said, the irony bitter on my tongue. Not yet. If I challenge this through normal channels, it could take weeks, and they'll assign it to an adjudicator. She blinked. Like you. Exactly like me. But I can't preside over my own case. That'd be conflict of interest. I have to wait until it's escalated to the division level. Mara frowned. So you're just supposed to let him ruin us? No, I said. I'm supposed to let him hang himself. Over the next few weeks, Rick's harassment grew bolder. He called my suppliers, hinting that they might be implicated in an investigation if they kept working with me. He even left a voicemail for one of my competitors, saying, loud enough to be recorded, that Maple Hollow won't be certified by month's end. The man was practically writing his own downfall. Still, the damage was brutal. My farmhand hours had to be cut, production slowed, and the community started whispering. At the local feed store, an old friend asked carefully, Tom, everything okay out there? Heard you got a bad inspector. I forced a smile. Just a misunderstanding. But the truth was, I'd started gathering evidence, photos, time-stamped records, even security footage. Every false claim he made, I had a counterproof. And then something curious happened. Lena showed up one evening off the clock. She parked at the edge of the driveway and walked up, glancing over her shoulder like she didn't want to be seen. Mr. Carver, she said quietly, I can't stay long, but I thought you should know. Rick filed your suspension before his own lab results came back. I stared at her. That's illegal. I know, she said, eyes wide. He told the district office the samples were contaminated, but I processed them myself. They were clean. Why are you telling me this? She swallowed. Because he's done this before. 2 other farms got hit. One lost their certification completely. But I can't prove it. He makes it look official. I nodded slowly. You've done enough just by telling me. She handed me a folded paper. That's the internal tracking number for the lab results. If you request them directly from the USDA database, they'll have to release them. When she left, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. For the first time, I had him cornered. The next morning, I filed a formal request for the sample results. I didn't use my adjudicator credentials, just my regular farmer ID. 3 days later, a reply came through. No contamination detected. All tests passed. There it was in black and white. Rick had falsified a federal inspection report. That was enough to trigger an internal investigation if it got into the right hands. Luckily, I was the right hands. I didn't act immediately, though. No, I waited. Because the USDA review board met quarterly, and one of the pending cases on the next docket was about to bear Rick's name. An audit complaint from another farm he'd targeted last year. And guess who'd been assigned as the adjudicator? Me. That night, Mara caught me smiling for the first time in a month. What's got you grinning like that? She asked. Oh, I said, sliding the report across the table. Just karma setting the table. She picked it up, read the header, and then laughed. You're kidding me. He's about to be reviewed by you. Yep. Tom, she said, grinning. You're not planning anything illegal, are you? I winked. Of course not. Just fair. And fair's gonna sting. When the third inspection notice arrived, I almost laughed. It was so over the top it bordered on parody. Immediate reevaluation required due to potential public health hazard. Public health hazard? My operation was cleaner than most restaurants in town. But the laughter faded when I saw what came with it. A formal USDA notice taped to my gate. Rick had declared Maple Hollow Poultry temporarily closed pending corrective action. Luis was the first to spot it. He came running into the office, his face pale. Tom, you'd better see this. I stepped outside and saw the bright orange paper flapping in the wind like a flag of defeat. My stomach turned. He'd done it. Rick had actually shut me down. Effective immediately, the notice read, no birds, feed, or processed product may leave or enter the premises until the suspension is lifted. That meant no deliveries, no feed shipments, no income, nothing. A total lockdown. Mara walked up behind me, reading over my shoulder. Can he even do that? He can, I said bitterly. For now. By the end of the week, we were drowning. The feed bins were running low, and our bank account was worse. Rick had tanked our contracts, and the gossip had spread like wildfire. At the diner, I overheard a couple of farmers whispering, "Shame about Tom's place. Guess even the clean ones slip up sometimes." They didn't mean harm, but every word felt like a nail in my coffin. That night, as I made rounds in the barns, I noticed something strange. A few birds were coughing, wheezing. I frowned. That wasn't normal. I checked the feed storage area and found the problem immediately. One of the bins reeked of mold. "Luis!" I yelled. "Get over here!" He rushed in, flashlight in hand. We climbed up the ladder and looked inside. The top layer of feed was damp and clumped together, like someone had poured water into it. "This wasn't like this yesterday," Luis said. We checked. I stared at the bin, fury rising in my chest. No, it wasn't. Somebody tampered with it. We both knew who. Rick had been the only outsider near the silos during his last inspection. He'd wandered off for a few minutes, saying he needed to make a call. I gritted my teeth. He's trying to make it real. He's trying to make it look like contamination. Luis looked horrified. "That's criminal, Tom." "Yeah," I said coldly. "And now it's personal." The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I put on my USDA badge. Not the one for field work. The other one. The one I wore when I sat in a federal office reviewing cases just like this. That morning, my inbox pinged with the quarterly docket assignments. And there it was in bold black letters. Case hashtag 22-481. Allegation of misconduct by USDA Field Inspector Richard Harlow. Felt like divine timing. I stared at the screen for a long moment, thinking about all the farms he'd probably steamrolled before mine. About Lena, the young inspector, terrified to speak up. About my father, who'd always said, "Power doesn't corrupt everyone, son. It just reveals who they already are." Well, Rick was about to be revealed. Still, I knew better than to mix personal revenge with official duty. I couldn't bring my own case into his hearing. But what I could do was make sure every piece of his misconduct saw daylight, starting with what he'd done to me. Before I could act, though, Rick struck again. It was a Sunday morning when Luis burst into the house, shouting, "Tom, the processing barn, it's flooded." I ran outside in my slippers. Sure enough, water poured out the door like a river. A pipe had been deliberately opened, the one feeding the scalding tank used for processing. It was a safety hazard, a contamination risk, and a nightmare for cleanup. We shut off the valve and started sweeping water out, but I already knew how this story would go. Rick would happen to show up and claim he caught us mid-violation. And sure enough, 2 hours later, a familiar white USDA truck rolled up. Rick climbed out, his grin wider than ever. Well, what do we have here?" "You tell me," I said, dripping with sarcasm. "You seem to know everything about my operation." He ignored that. "I'll have to report this, of course. A water line rupture in a food prep area, serious issue." Luis muttered under his breath. "Convenient timing." Rick's eyes narrowed. "What was that?" "Nothing," I said quickly, stepping between them. Rick smiled thinly. "Don't bother cleaning it up too much, Carver. Once a farm's reputation is gone, it never really comes back." He turned and started walking toward his truck. That's when I said it. "Enjoy your little power trip while it lasts, Rick, because your next inspection's going to be in a different kind of room, one where I hold the pen." He froze, half-turned, eyes glinting. "What's that supposed to mean?" I just smiled. "You'll find out." He gave a short laugh. "You think you can scare me? I write the reports." I leaned forward, voice low. "And I review them." For the first time, I saw his smirk falter. He didn't know the full truth yet, but the seed was planted. That night, I finished my own report not for my farm, but for the USDA Internal Affairs Unit. I included every falsified claim, every timestamped security clip, and every line of evidence Lena had provided. I attached the feed contamination photos and the lab results he'd ignored. Then I added one final paragraph. Inspector Richard Harlow has displayed consistent patterns of misconduct, falsified documentation, and unethical interference with independent farming operations. I recommend full review under Section 12.3 of USDA Conduct Protocol. When I hit send, my hands stopped shaking for the first time in weeks, because this wasn't just about saving my farm anymore. It was about ending his career. A few days later, an email came in from Internal Affairs. Mr. Carver, we have received your report and verified several inconsistencies in Mr. Harlow's recent inspections. This will be incorporated into case #22-481, currently under your review docket. I smiled. That was the final confirmation I needed. Rick had no idea he'd just become the subject, and I was about to be the one asking the questions. The man who tried to bury me was about to face a hearing in front of me, under oath, bound by the same rules he'd twisted to his own advantage. And this time, there'd be no mud puddle, no fake report, no escape. I shut down the computer, looked out at the dark barns, and exhaled. Mara came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist. So it's happening? It's happening, I said. He's going to stand in front of the board and answer for everything he's done. She smiled faintly. And you'll be sitting there? Front and center. Her grin turned mischievous. Better iron your shirt. That night, as the crickets chirped outside, I thought about every sleepless night, every insult, every lie. The fear, the humiliation, the helplessness. All of it had led to this moment. And I promised myself, when the hearing came, I wouldn't just defend my farm. I'd defend every small farmer Rick had ever steamrolled. He thought USDA rules were weapons. But he was about to learn something I already knew. Rules can cut both ways. The day of the hearing arrived bright and cold. The kind of morning where the air smells like frost and new beginnings. I parked my truck in front of the USDA regional office, the same one where Rick had probably strutted around for years, waving his clipboard like a badge of honor. But today, the tables had turned. Inside, the conference room was all federal formality, wood-paneled walls, the USDA seal, a row of chairs, and a single long table. 3 adjudicators' nameplates sat at the head. Mine was in the center. Thomas Carver, USDA Administrative Adjudicator. When I sat down, I wasn't a farmer anymore. I was the law. Rick walked in 10 minutes late, all swagger and cologne. He didn't even look up from his phone until the hearing coordinator said, "Inspector Richard Harlow, please take your seat." He finally looked up and froze. His smirk melted the second he saw my nameplate. "Mr. Carver?" he stammered, eyes darting between me and the others. What are you doing here?" I kept my face neutral. "Good morning, Inspector Harlow. Please take your seat." He sat slowly, still trying to process what was happening. Across the table sat 2 other board members, Janine Porter, the district compliance officer, and Dr. Ellis, a senior inspector from out west. Both of them knew me as a level-headed adjudicator. Neither knew the personal story behind this case. "Today," I began, my voice steady, "we'll be reviewing allegations of professional misconduct, falsification of inspection data, and breach of USDA Code Section 12.3. Inspector Harlow, you'll have the opportunity to respond to each item presented." Rick tried to regain his composure. I wasn't aware this case would be overseen by you. Assignments are randomized by rotation," I said calmly. "If you believe there's a conflict of interest, you may state so for the record." He hesitated. If he claimed conflict, it'd look like guilt. If he didn't, I stayed in charge. He swallowed. "No conflict." "Very well," I said. "Proceed." The first few minutes were pure procedure, dates, forms, summaries. Then came the evidence packet I'd prepared. Janine adjusted her glasses. "It says here you filed a contamination claim against Maple Hollow Poultry prior to receiving lab results?" Rick shifted in his seat. "That was a precautionary measure." Dr. Ellis frowned. "That's not standard procedure, Inspector. You're required to await lab confirmation before any official suspension." Rick cleared his throat. "Well, I'd had reports from community members. Unnamed sources. Janine cut in. And the samples came back negative, correct? He hesitated. That's what the lab said, yes, but sometimes results. I leaned forward. Did you alter or omit any part of that lab report in your final filing? He looked at me like he wanted to disappear. No, he lied. Janine raised an eyebrow. Because our audit shows the report you submitted to headquarters omitted page 3, the page confirming the samples were clear. The silence in that room was heavy enough to choke on. I kept my tone flat. Inspector Harlow, you are under oath. Did you knowingly file a falsified report? Rick's jaw tightened. I don't have to answer that. Dr. Ellis spoke next, voice sharp. You do, actually. You're being investigated under internal policy. This isn't optional. Rick's composure cracked. Look, maybe I made a clerical mistake. It happens. Paperwork gets messy in the field. I flipped to the next page in the binder. A clerical mistake wouldn't explain the Facebook post you made warning buyers to avoid my... I paused, catching myself just before saying my farm. To avoid Maple Hollow Poultry. 2 days before that suspension was even filed. He blinked. That's irrelevant to the case. Janine's voice cut like ice. It's absolutely relevant if it demonstrates malicious intent. Rick started sweating. His collar looked suddenly too tight. We went line by line through his record. Every false claim, every inconsistency. Then came Lena's testimony. She entered the room looking nervous but determined. Janine smiled kindly. Inspector Morales, you were Mr. Harlow's trainee during several inspections, correct? Yes, ma'am. Can you describe Mr. Harlow's conduct during those inspections? Lena took a deep breath. He told me not to worry about small farms. Said, quote, they can't afford to fight back anyway. He'd go off alone during inspections and come back with photos that didn't match what I'd seen. Rick shot up from his chair. She's lying. She's just a rookie who... Sit down, I said firmly. He glared at me, but sat. Lena continued, her voice steadier now. He told me Maple Hollow's owner was getting too confident, and that shutting him down would send a message to the others. Janine turned to Rick. Did you make that statement? Rick's face turned red. I might have joked. Under oath. I reminded him. His voice cracked. Fine. Yes. But it wasn't serious. Dr. Ellis leaned back, sighing. Serious or not, that's intimidation. The boardroom fell silent again. At that moment I could have ended it, called the vote, issued the penalty. But I wanted the truth, not just revenge. So I asked the question that had burned in my gut since day one. Why me, Rick? He looked up, startled. What? Why target Maple Hollow? Why falsify that report? For a second I thought he'd stay silent. Then he muttered, because your farm was undercutting a contract I was supposed to secure for my brother-in-law's company. There it was. The real motive. Greed and nepotism. Janine's pen froze mid-sentence. Are you admitting to a conflict of interest in your inspections? Rick realized too late what he'd said. That's not. I didn't mean. Dr. Ellis closed the file. I think we've heard enough. After deliberation, the board voted unanimously. Inspector Richard Harlow guilty of misconduct, falsification, and abuse of authority. Immediate termination and referral for federal review. I sat quietly as the verdict was read. Rick's face went gray. He stood, trembling. You set me up. I met his eyes. No, Rick. You set yourself up. I just followed the rules you thought you were above. Security escorted him out, still sputtering. The door clicked shut, and with it, months of fear and anger finally dissolved. Janine turned to me, unaware of the personal weight behind it all. Good work, Carver. Cases like that remind us why the system exists. I nodded. Yes, ma'am. Justice served. Outside, the winter sun hit my face like a benediction. I stood there for a moment, breathing deep. For the first time in months, I didn't feel tension in my chest. When I got home, Mara was waiting on the porch, coffee mug in hand. She took one look at my face and grinned. It's done, isn't it? It's done, I said. She raised her mug in salute. To karma. I smiled. to karma and USDA policy. We both laughed. That night, I sat out by the barns, listening to the rustle of the hens. The same stars that had watched me suffer now watched me heal. The world felt balanced again. Rick had thought power came from fear, but real power, the kind that matters, comes from truth, patience, and doing things the right way. The day after Rick Harlow's termination, Maple Hollow Poultry felt like it had been exhaling for the first time in months. The feed trucks rolled in without a hitch. The hens clucked in rhythm. Their usual chatter filled the barns, and even the smell of fresh straw seemed sweeter. Luis was back to moving through the barns at lightning speed, refilling water troughs and checking egg baskets. I walked through the processing barn, noting every detail. Everything was in order, equipment clean, lines disinfected, and paperwork meticulously updated. I realized I hadn't noticed the simple satisfaction of a properly functioning farm in months. Mara appeared at the doorway, holding a thermos of coffee. "Looks like life is returning to normal," she said. "Feels like it," I admitted. The small town seemed quieter that week, too. Word had spread about Rick Harlow, but without my name attached. Nobody knew I'd been the one presiding over his case. That gave me a private kind of satisfaction, the invisible hand of karma. Lena, the young inspector, came by the farm one afternoon. She looked nervous at first, holding a clipboard as if it were armor. "You did what?" she asked softly. I chuckled. "I just followed the evidence. Rules are rules, Lena. But some people forget that those rules apply to everyone, even inspectors." She smiled, a little crooked, a little relieved. "I guess I learned more about the USDA in the last few months than I ever did in training." "Good lesson," I said. "And now you know never underestimate the little guy. Sometimes the person you think you're stomping on is the one who holds the pen." Her grin widened. "Noted." Business slowly returned to normal. Our contracts resumed, and my buyers were more loyal than ever. Some even admitted they'd lost faith in certain inspectors and agencies, but trusted me and Maple Hollow because of the transparency and care we'd always maintained. There was still work to do, of course. The barns needed minor repairs from Rick's sabotage. The feed bins were inspected and reinforced, and I made sure to install extra cameras around the property just in case. But those were small inconveniences compared to the months of stress, the false accusations, and the nights spent staring at the ceiling wondering how I'd survive. The community noticed the difference. Farmers I hadn't spoken to in years came by to congratulate me, a quiet acknowledgement of the storm we'd all weathered. Even Luis seemed lighter, whistling as he stacked crates of eggs. "I never thought I'd see the day, boss," he said. "Feels like we won a war without even firing a shot." "Exactly," I replied. That winter, I started hosting small workshops for local farmers on USDA compliance, biosecurity, and ethical inspection practices. I wanted to turn the bitterness of the past into something constructive. During one of the sessions, Lena asked a question that made me pause. "Don't you worry about retaliation?" she said. "People like Harlow, they always try to come back." I smiled. "Karma is a lot like a crop," I said. "You plant it carefully, tend it, and harvest it in its own time. Harlow got exactly what he sowed. Nothing more, nothing less. That's enough." The farmers laughed, and I could see the relief in Lena's eyes. Spring came, and with it, renewal. The hens started laying more eggs than ever. The broilers grew healthy and strong, and our processing lines ran smoothly. One morning, I stood at the edge of the property, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the barns. I thought about the past year, the sabotage, the false reports, the fear, and how it had all transformed into something satisfying. Not revenge for the sake of anger, but justice for the sake of fairness. Rick Harlow would be out of the USDA for good. His professional reputation was ruined, and anyone who had been tempted to abuse their power would think twice. And my farm survived stronger, cleaner, and wiser. Sometimes, Mara teases me about how dramatic I get when telling the story. "You should write a book," she says, "or a YouTube channel, USDA Stories." I laugh. Maybe someday. But the real story is the one we lived through. The rest is just the icing on the cake. and the icing was sweet. Even Luis agreed. "I've seen a lot of farms in trouble," he said one afternoon while stacking crates. "But I've never seen one get this kind of poetic justice." Harlow didn't even see it coming. I smirked. That's the best part. The moral of it all? Rules aren't just for compliance. They're for accountability. And sometimes, the person who seems powerless is actually the one holding the authority to deliver justice. I never underestimated Rick Harlow again. Not that I needed to. He'd already taught me the most valuable lesson of all. Never let anyone think they can manipulate the system without consequences. Now, whenever I walk the barns, check the feed, and watch the hens peck at the morning light, I feel a sense of calm. Not because the fight is over, it never really is in farming, but because I know the balance has been restored. Some people spend their lives trying to cheat the system, thinking no one is watching. But karma, like the USDA, always has a way of catching up. And sometimes, the person delivering it is the one you'd least expect. As the sun set over Maple Hollow Poultry, casting golden light across the fields, I poured myself a cup of coffee and raised it toward the barns. "Here's to rules, to farms, and to karma," I whispered, because in the end, that's what kept us standing. Thanks for listening to USDA Stories, where every rule has a loophole, and karma always finds its way.